This next video then will help you with Unit 7, implementing person-centred approaches. It's again a combined unit, so you'll need both an observation from your assessor and some underpinning knowledge, so some questions and answers which we're going to go through as part of this video. 1.1 asks you to define person-centred values. So what you have to do by define is give a definition of those person-centred values. So have a look at all those fundamental values that you follow day to day in your work practice. That of choice, independence, respect, dignity, individuality, rights, and also the 6 C's. So have a look at the NHS 6 C's. Combine all those and you get what's called a person-centred value, what an individual stands for. So you have to look at each one of those and give a definition of them. 1.2 asks you to look at why it's important to embed and work with person-centred values. So thinking about the person-centred values that you've defined in 1.1, look at each of those and look at why it's important to promote independence. What's the reason we promote independence? Why is it important to treat a person with dignity? Why do we have to respect their choice of lifestyle and look at and promote their beliefs, their preferences? What's important about those person-centred values and why do we embed them? 1.3 asks you to explain why risk-taking can be part of a person-centred approach. So we have to promote positive risk-taking for individuals to allow them to have as much control and choice over their life. It promotes independence, it allows that individual to be actively involved. So whilst we might think it's too great of a risk, we've got to look at their capacity and look at whether they've got the capability of making that decision and understanding the risk factors that's been identified. Whilst we might think it's a negative risk to take, we have to be seen to promote that and find that balance between an individual's right and that risk involved, by using control measures to make sure that risk doesn't occur or to reduce that risk from occurring. But positive risk taking is good. We all take positive risks on a daily basis, but what you've got to do is define and give an explanation as to why positive risk taking impacts on person-centred care. Because if you're allowing an individual to take positive risks, to do what they want for themselves, it's providing that personalised care and support because you're giving them what they want. You're meeting their needs, wishes and preferences. You're allowing them to have choice and control over their life. So think about positive risk-taking and explain how it impacts on personalised care. 1.4 is asking you to explain why following a care plan can have an impact on person-centred care. So what I want you to do is grab a care plan from your place of work, have a look at all the different components within it, have a good read of it. Then I want you to explain what information is available, be mindful of confidentiality, but look at how then that impacts the care that you give. So for example, the mobility section, if you didn't read and understand an individual's mobility care plan, you aren't going to be able to know what equipment they need, what transfers they need supporting with, what they're able to do for themselves, what risks have been identified. So that section alone allows you to fulfill their mobility needs, their nutritional needs. There's probably a must risk assessment, what looks at their eating and drinking and what support they might need, any supplements they might need in terms of meeting their nutritional needs. So a care plan is central to the care delivery. It's central to everything that we do in order to meet those needs, wishes and preferences of that individual. They might have some individual goals or outcomes that they wish to achieve as part of being in that care setting, and that care plan should support them to do that. It will also identify any risks associated with that individual and inform you what to do in your work practice to reduce them risks. So what I want you to do is explain the benefit of using a care plan and what does that then do in your work practice to make sure you provide personalised care and support. 3.1 asks you to explain the importance of establishing consent when providing care and support. So day to day in our work practice, we should be seen to be offering or gaining consent for care and treatment. That's a fundamental human right for an individual. They've got a right to consent to any care and treatment that you're providing. So there's a couple of legislations that you need to look at within this answer. Firstly, look at the Human Rights Act. Look at what the Human Rights says about consent, about an individual's right to consent to care and treatment, and write about it. Secondly, we know that the Mental Capacity Act 2005 promotes decision making for individuals, and it states that every individual has a right to make a decision for themselves until it's proven that they lack capacity. So within your answer, look at the 5 principles of the Mental Capacity Act and explain why it's important to get consent of an individual. Now, consent can be in 3 different ways. So it's written, so we've already got that advanced decision written down within the care plan. It could be verbal, by you asking them, or it could be implied. So people that might be non-verbal might use body language or facial expressions or hand gestures in order to imply consent. So look at the 3 types of consent, look at both those legislations and explain the importance of getting consent from an individual. 3.3 asks you to explain the steps to take or the measures you take when you cannot readily establish consent. So we need to look at the principles of the Mental Capacity Act again. Has a mental capacity assessment been done on this individual? Have they had a best interest meeting to establish whether this individual has the capacity to make a decision for themselves or not? If they haven't, that would, I imagine, be the first step. If an individual cannot give consent, get a best interest meeting done, look at whether this person has the capacity or not to make a decision. Following on from that best interest meeting, a DOLS may be put in place. So a DOLS is a deprivation of liberty safeguard, and it looks to put in the right systems in place to make sure that you act in the best interest of an individual when they lack capacity. They may give you an advocate, or they may have an advocate that is working on behalf of that individual who lacks capacity, so we may need to consult them. They may have a family member that's got sort of a power of attorney. Now, power of attorney comes in 2 different forms. There's one for health and well-being and one for finances. So look at that. Do we need to consult them? So think about the people we can go to and the steps that needs to be in place when you're unable to get consent of that individual. Looking at mental capacity assessment, DOLS assessments, best interest assessments, looking at advocates, looking at power of attorney. Once you've covered all those avenues, you should be able to look at making a decision for that individual yourself based on the information you've been provided with. 4.1 asks you to describe how active participation benefits an individual. Now, active participation is about actively and proactively involving that individual in the care that they receive. So, all service users, all residents, all individuals should be an active participant, not a passive recipient, not on the receiving end of a service, but actively involved in the choices, in the control of it. So if you're allowing an individual to be actively involved in the care and support that they received, they're going to have that sense of well-being, that sense of belonging, that sense of choice and control over their lifestyle. That is a human right, and that's their right to life. So we've got to look at the benefits of active participation. Why do we need to involve them in decision making? Why do we need to allow them to have choice and control over their lifestyle and their wants, their needs, their wishes, their preferences? Why is that important? So look at the benefit of actively involving that individual within their care and not being on the passive receiving end of a service. 4.2 wants you to identify barriers to active participation. So all you've got to do is identify some of them. What prevents you from actively involving that resident? It may be their underlying medical condition. They may have a diagnosis of dementia, which limits their ability to participate because we're focusing on their medical model rather than the social model and allowing them to socially be involved. So there's often too much emphasis on a person's disability rather than their ability. It might be that institutionalised approach to the care that you're giving, because you've got too much to do in such a little time when you're working in a residential setting, that there's often not that time to provide that personalised care and support, and that in itself could be a barrier to actively involving that individual. Thinking about getting an individual involved in a group, it may be they prefer to do things alone. So that in itself is going to create a barrier. So what things prevent an individual becoming actively involved? It may be the lack of equipment, lack of resources, lack of staff training, lack of knowledge and understanding about that individual, lack of detail in the care plan. What can cause barriers to your work setting or your work practice that's going to prevent an individual being actively involved? And write about them. 5.3 asks you to explain why a care worker's personal views shouldn't influence an individual's decision. So we have to recognise that whilst we're all human and we've all got our own beliefs and values, it's important that when we're at work, we recognise their choice of lifestyle and respect that. We don't want to prevent empowerment. We want that individual to be empowered. We want them to have choice and control. We don't want to seem to be discriminatory towards their choice of lifestyle and their human rights. So by not allowing our own views and beliefs and preferences to influence their decision, we're going to prevent that. So what we need to look at is the reasons why our own attitudes and values shouldn't influence an individual's decision making, because we've got to be non-judgmental about their choice of lifestyle. Yes, they've got to positively risk take. Yes, they've got to have much choice and control over it. But what their opinion is may differ to ours, and we've got to be seen to allowing for them to have that freedom of choice, freedom of sort of like speech, and allowing them to have much choice and control over their life, and not influencing them with our own decisions and values and behaviours. Let them be the one that decides. Let them be in choice and control where able. So for this assessment criteria, just look at the reasons why we shouldn't let our own values, our own behaviours, our own attitudes influence that of a resident, service user or an individual. So 5.4 asks you to describe how to support an individual to challenge a decision that's been made on behalf of them. So what you need to look at is empowering that individual and giving them the confidence to be able to challenge. Build up that rapport with your resident. Let them know that you're there to support them. Some of them just may need that encouragement, and letting them know that it's their right to complain, their right to challenge any decision that's made on behalf of them where they've not been actively involved in that decision making. So you may need to provide them access to the complaints procedure, let them know the procedure to raise concerns, but ultimately empower them to do that, let them know it's their choice. So for this assessment criteria, just explain to me why it's important to empower that individual to raise concerns, to challenge decisions that's been made on their behalf when they've not been actively involved in it, if they're able to do so. 6.1 asks you to explain how an individual's identity and self-esteem links with their well-being. So have a look at Carl Rogers' person-centred theory. Within his theory, he recognises that for an individual to have an increased well-being, they have to have an holistic approach or an holistic assessment towards all of their needs, and not just focusing on their physical needs, but looking at their spiritual, their emotional, their medical. So considering everything about that person that's having an holistic approach. And if you recognise their identity and look at who they are as a person and sort of respect and promote that, in turn then that increases their well-being, their sense of belonging, their pride. It makes them feel better about themselves, because everyone wants to be recognised as an individual. So all you need to do is just explain what identity is, what well-being is, and what self-esteem is, and look at how they're linked together. Look at how recognising an individual, raising their self-esteem, impacts positively on their well-being. 6.2, you have to describe attitudes and approaches that has a positive impact or is likely to improve an individual's well-being. So as a carer, as someone that works in health and social care, I would expect you to have that positive approach to that individual. You show an interest in their needs. You build that rapport, you build that trust, and show that you're interested in their lifestyle. Recognise and respect their choice of lifestyle, their culture, their beliefs. That in itself builds that positive rapport, builds that trust, shows an interest, and in turn increases their well-being. You proactively seeking development opportunities, additional training about medical conditions that you perhaps don't understand or never come across, showing an interest in that individual's needs and learning how to meet them, in turn increases that well-being. So what I want to know is, what can you do in your work practice that might increase an individual's well-being, or what can you do in terms of your attitudes or your approach to your job role that might show an interest in that individual? That then in turn increases their well-being. 6.6 then asks you to explain the importance of good nutrition and hydration. So all you have to do is explain and describe the benefits of having a good diet and good fluid intake. So I would suggest do some research on the NHS Eat Well plate, look at having an healthy diet, a balanced diet, and the recommendations and guidelines for fluid intake each day. Look at the benefits of that to an individual. What is the positive impact on having a good diet and good fluid intake, and just write about the benefits.